Hello, I am David W. Parker. This is Programming Today I Learned, Learning to Code from Scratch series, basic HTML, and basic learning, all from the beginning. You don't know a thing? This is the place to start. Let's go ahead and dive into our demo today. We're going to be looking at images and then a little bit more about relative versus absolute paths. So you could see a few things here. And there we go. Let's go ahead and dive into what these pages look like. So first things first, we have our index. I've reorganized it a little bit and added a new nav, a secondary nav. That's why we have two rows here. The first one has the index, and the other has the about. Both of these live in my same folder here for source. So I can reference the other by just saying about. And that allows me to go back and forth between these two pages. I'm zoomed out, which is why these are different size, but let me make sure they're both the same. So you can see they're both the same now. And the about page is basically the same, except slightly different. So the first thing is, of course, I have a H1 over here. And then I have some paragraphs and some BRs. What are those? And then I have some images tags here. Let's go ahead and look at all of that. First thing to be aware of is that a BR tag, and that produces a line break in text, character turn, useful for writing poetry, or an address where the division of lines is significant. So it's not supposed to be used for between paragraphs. Use the CSS margin property. So you wouldn't really use it like my example here, where I have a few line breaks. That really doesn't make any sense. You don't want to do this when you're coding things. You want to end your paragraph and have a new paragraph. And if you want to add a little bit of extra space between the two, you can add margins. We'll get into those in a future episode. But this is just to show you what it does. It breaks the line and starts a new line. So for example, if I didn't have this one here, deleted that, and I refresh this page, you'd see the word source is way over here on the right-hand side. But instead, I have a line break, and now it's below. So that's all there is to line breaks. Let's go ahead and look at the image tag real quick. So the first image tag is img, and we have a source, and it's this absolute URL, so this really long URL. And source is just src, by the way. And you can see here's the picture that I'm loading in. That would be a little bit different because I have it set to size 175 here to make it bigger for the video. So here's this image tag, and it sorts embedding of an image. Source is required, and then we also have an alt text here. So I could say alt and say San Fran Bridge. So it holds a description. It's not mandatory, but it's incredibly useful for accessibility. So people who may be blind. Screen readers read this description out loud to their users so they know what an image means. So you don't want to say something like a picture. You want to describe what the picture is. Alt text is also displayed on the page if the image can't be loaded. So if there's a network error or something times out, the alt text will be displayed there. So that's something really important to have. And you should also know that Google will go ahead and give you a bad type of, they'll knock you on SEO, search engine optimization, if you don't provide alt text. You should definitely do that. Another thing is, so far our links have all been relative. So these are within the same page, as you recall. These are new pages. But down here, I also have links to external pages. So these sources link to somewhere else on the internet. So you can write out the entire URL here, and that'll link somewhere else. One interesting thing to potentially use is the target attribute. And that allows you to open in a new tab or a same tab. So you can see here it says specifies where it's going to display the URL. So we could do self, which is the same tab. That's the default behavior. You don't really need to ever use that. Blank you will commonly see in applications where it opens in a new tab. And normally a new tab, but users can configure their browsers to be new windows. And there's a couple of others that you won't use generally as much. When using target, considering using add rel no refer to avoid exploitation. So we can go ahead and say target blank, it's underscore blank here, on the about for this first link. I refreshed it. Now if I click this, it's going to automatically open in a new tab. Whereas if I go click the other one, it's in the same tab. So that's an interesting little tidbit. Now, one other thing here, a couple other things here. I added an HTML entity to this. So this little ampersand copy semicolon shows up as this copyright sign. And those are called HTML entities. You may see them on different websites. Nowadays, you might not use them as much because you might just use the character itself directly. But you could see on entitydecode.com or some other website has a bunch of different ones that you can use, and you can see trademark sign, for example, registered signal. All of those can be easily put into HTML with these entity tags. It's not even a tag, this entity code. Another thing to note is we can kind of shift things around. So let's go ahead and take this second image and say alt person working. And it's still going to load just fine on this about page. But let's move the image. Let's go ahead and drop it into images here. Oops, let me rewrite that. And that's a very common thing. You don't necessarily want to have everything being one giant bucket on your application because, you know, it's like throwing everything on your desktop. You want to have it organized. So now if I load this, it's broken. Like it says, if it says person working and has a little broken image symbol, but everything is, again, relative. So we can write images and then the file, refresh this, and there's our image again. And the same thing can be said for different pages. So maybe we want to go ahead and say pages, and let's move this about into pages. Now, if I go to the home page and I click about, it's not there because on our home page, in our navigation, we're trying to reference about in the exact same spot. But if I put pages first and then go ahead and reference it, you'll see it's blue because it hasn't been there yet. And here's the page again. And then, but if I try to go back, again, relative, it's trying to look in pages. So you can go up by doing ... So ... / will reference the file above, the folder above, and that allows us to go back and forth between the two. So that's a little bit of ways that you can go ahead and organize how your stuff is done. You can also, again, do absolute references. I believe this works. Let's see here. Yes, so of course, absolute reference works as well. And that's the file here. The main thing to note is if you do something like that, it's not going to be accessible on the internet. Your system that's on your computer won't work. So generally speaking, you're not going to do that. You may do something more with an absolute URL like this, but something on your file system, generally not. Unless you're making something maybe for yourself. So that's it for this episode. Super simple. You can go ahead and start building out your application a little bit more. And in the next one, we're going to get back into some Git commands and learning a little bit more of the basics around that. And we'll continue to build this out slowly so you can learn to code from scratch. If you'd like and subscribe this content, that's fantastic. That'd be really great. I'm also on Patreon if you want to support. I always put up some videos a little bit early so you can see them before they're live. And thank you guys. Talk to you later.